Ethan had spent most of his life carrying around a secret he couldn't put into words. It had started when he was young. He remembered being strangely drawn to beautiful dresses, delicate fabrics, elegant accessories, and the careful art of putting an outfit together. But even then, he understood that it wasn't really the clothes that fascinated him. It was how they made him feel. Whenever Ethan imagined himself wearing them, something inside him seemed to loosen. The nervousness that followed him through everyday life became quieter. The constant pressure to behave like the person everyone expected him to be seemed to disappear. For a few precious moments, he didn't feel like he was pretending. He felt free. At 19, Ethan had become exceptionally good at keeping that part of himself hidden. To his classmates, he was just another quiet college student. He went to lectures, finished his assignments, and kept his personal life carefully out of sight. He rarely attracted attention, and he preferred it that way. Being unnoticed meant being safe. Because if nobody looked too closely, nobody would discover the truth. His secret world existed behind the locked door of his bedroom. Whenever the house was quiet and he was certain he wouldn't be disturbed, Ethan would reach beneath his bed and pull out a battered storage box. Inside was a private collection he had assembled slowly over the years. Nothing had been easy to acquire. There was the dress he'd nervously ordered online, wondering the entire time whether someone might somehow discover the purchase. There were stockings hidden beneath old college textbooks, accessories collected one at a time, and a wig he'd chosen after spending hours comparing different styles. Every item represented a small act of courage. And every time he put them on, Ethan felt as though he was stepping into a different version of himself. That Friday evening, however, something unexpected happened. His mother, Clara, announced that she would be spending the weekend at her sister's house several hours away. To anyone else, it would have sounded like an ordinary family trip. To Ethan, it sounded like freedom. 2 days. 48 hours without questions, interruptions, or the constant fear of being discovered. The moment the front door finally closed behind her, Ethan could barely contain his excitement. He hurried upstairs and pulled his hidden collection from beneath the bed. Within minutes, his bedroom had been transformed. A soft pink dress lay across the bed. Stockings were carefully arranged beside it. His wig rested nearby, ready to complete the look. Around everything sat the small accessories he'd collected over the years, including a pearl necklace he'd once bought under the excuse that it was a present for Emma. Emma. Even thinking about her made Ethan's stomach twist. She had been his girlfriend for more than a year. She was kind, patient, and genuinely cared about him. Yet there was one part of himself he'd never allowed her to see. He had imagined telling her countless times. Every time, fear won. What if she didn't understand? What if she looked at him differently? What if the person he loved most decided she couldn't accept the truth? So Ethan had remained silent. He told himself that keeping the secret was easier. He told himself he could live like this forever. That evening, standing alone in front of his mirror, Ethan almost believed it. He carefully dressed, adjusting every detail until he was satisfied. Then he stood still. The reflection staring back at him seemed softer somehow. More authentic. The tension he'd carried all week began to fade. For once, Ethan smiled at his own reflection without immediately wondering whether someone else would approve. He felt peaceful. Then he heard the front door downstairs. The smile disappeared. Ethan froze. For a moment, he tried to convince himself he'd imagined it. Then came the sound of footsteps. His heart began pounding. Ethan. His mother's voice. The blood seemed to drain from his face. No. She wasn't supposed to be here. He barely had time to move before the bedroom door opened. Clara stood in the doorway. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. The dress. The wig. The makeup. The necklace. The collection scattered across the bed. Everything Ethan had spent years hiding was suddenly sitting in plain sight. Silence filled the room. Ethan couldn't breathe properly. He wanted to explain. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to insist there was some misunderstanding. But his mind had gone completely blank. He waited for anger. For shouting. For disappointment. Instead, Clara simply folded her arms. So, she said quietly, this is what you've been keeping from me. Ethan stared at the floor. Mom, The words refused to come. Clara studied him for several seconds. I always suspected there was something you weren't telling me, she continued. I just didn't know what it was. Ethan's face burned with shame. Then something completely unexpected happened. Clara smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't disgust. It was something far more difficult for Ethan to understand. Curiosity. You like this, don't you? Ethan looked up. He couldn't bring himself to answer. He didn't have to. Clara seemed to understand anyway. Her gaze moved toward the collection on the bed. Slowly, she began examining the things Ethan had hidden for so long. She picked up one accessory, then another, as if trying to understand the person behind the secret. Finally, she looked back at her son. If this is something that matters to you, she said, then hiding it forever isn't going to make it disappear. Ethan stared at her. What are you saying? Clara's expression remained strangely calm. I'm saying we're done pretending that this doesn't exist. Those words left Ethan more confused than angry words ever could have. He had spent years imagining the moment someone discovered his secret. Never once had he imagined this. He didn't know whether he should feel relieved or terrified. Perhaps both. Then Clara stepped closer. Come with me. Ethan's anxiety immediately returned. Where? She didn't answer. Instead, she took his wrist and led him out of the bedroom. They walked down the hallway and stopped outside her room. Ethan stared at her uncertainly. Clara opened the door. Inside, everything looked exactly as it always had. Family photographs lined the shelves. Her perfume lingered faintly in the air. The room felt familiar, yet Ethan suddenly felt as though he were entering completely unknown territory. Clara went straight to her closet. Ethan watched as she began searching through drawers and shelves. Mom, he said nervously, what are you doing? If you're going to do this, Clara replied, you need to understand that an outfit is only one part of the picture. Ethan blinked. What? Clara continued sorting through her clothes. You can't expect to create an entire appearance with one dress and a wig. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. Clara stopped. She turned toward him. Is it? Ethan had no answer. There was something unsettling about how calm she was. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't angry. If anything, she seemed to have already accepted the situation and moved on to the next question. She selected several pieces of clothing and placed them on the bed. Take these. Ethan stared at them. His first instinct was to refuse. This had already gone far beyond anything he'd imagined. His secret had been discovered, his mother wasn't angry, and now she was somehow helping him. It was overwhelming. Yet beneath the fear was another feeling. Curiosity. A part of him wanted to know where this strange new path might lead. Finally, Ethan picked up the clothes. He disappeared into the bathroom and closed the door. For several minutes, he simply stood there. His reflection stared back at him. What had happened to his carefully controlled life? That morning, he had been an ordinary college student preparing for a quiet weekend. Now everything had changed. He slowly began changing into the clothes Clara had given him. When he finally looked in the mirror again, the person staring back seemed even farther removed from the Ethan everyone else knew. And yet, strangely, he didn't hate what he saw. The boundary between his public identity and the person he'd hidden for years seemed to be becoming less clear. Eventually, Ethan opened the bathroom door. Clara looked up. For the first time that evening, she seemed genuinely pleased. There, she said. Much better. Ethan shifted awkwardly. Clara walked around him, examining the result from different angles. Ethan felt his face growing warm. Then Clara returned to her dresser. She opened the top drawer. Ethan's stomach tightened. What now? Clara reached inside. When she turned around, she was holding something Ethan immediately recognized. A long blonde wig. His eyes widened. Mom. Clara held it up with a faint smile. One last thing. Ethan stared at the wig. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And as Clara stepped toward him, Ethan realized that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the life he'd been living before. The secret was no longer his alone. And somehow, that frightened him almost as much as it fascinated him. The blonde wig fell gently around Ethan's shoulders. He stared at himself in the mirror. For several long seconds, he couldn't move. The reflection looking back at him no longer resembled the quiet college student who had woken up that morning. The transformation wasn't perfect, but it was convincing enough to make his chest tighten. He barely recognized himself. Clara watched him through the mirror. Then she spoke. There's just one thing missing. Ethan turned slowly. What? A name. His stomach dropped. A name. Clara nodded as if the answer were obvious. If you're going to stand there looking like someone else, you can't keep calling yourself Ethan. Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Clara seemed amused by his reaction. She walked around the room, pretending to think deeply about the problem. Something simple, she murmured. Something that suits you. Ethan waited nervously. Then Clara smiled. Emily. The name seemed to hang in the air. Ethan felt an unexpected chill run through him. Emily. He didn't know why hearing it affected him so strongly. Clara stepped closer. Say it. Ethan looked away. What? Your name. I can't. Why? He wanted to answer. He really did. But the truth was that he didn't know. Was it because the name wasn't his? Or was it because some part of him was afraid it was? Clara waited. She didn't pressure him. She simply stood there, watching. Eventually, Ethan took a breath. Emily. The word barely escaped his lips. It was almost a whisper. But the moment he heard himself say it, something shifted inside him. Clara smiled. There. She brought her hands together once. Much better. Ethan stared at his reflection. Nothing about him had physically changed. And yet, somehow, everything had. Until that moment, this hidden version of himself had only existed in private. A secret he could remove whenever he wanted. But now it had a name. Emily. And suddenly, that secret felt real. Come downstairs, Clara said. Ethan blinked. Why? Dinner. He followed her. Slowly. Each step down the staircase felt strangely unfamiliar. The house he had lived in for years suddenly seemed like a place he'd never visited before. By the time they reached the dining room, Ethan's nerves were nearly unbearable. The table had already been prepared. The lights were dim. Candles flickered quietly. Everything looked peaceful. Everything except him. Clara sat down and motioned toward the chair opposite her. Ethan lowered himself into it. For several minutes, neither spoke. Ethan stared at his plate. His mind was running in too many directions at once. Finally, Clara broke the silence. You're nervous. Obviously. A faint smile appeared on her face. That's understandable. Ethan looked up. For perhaps the first time in his life, he didn't see the strict, unshakable woman he had grown up fearing. He saw his mother. Someone who seemed to understand more than she was saying. Everything changed very quickly for you, Clara said. Ethan looked down again. Maybe. Maybe. He sighed. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. That was the most honest thing he'd said all night. Clara leaned back. Then, without warning, she said, Tomorrow, we're going shopping. Ethan nearly dropped his fork. What? Shopping? No. Clara raised an eyebrow. We need some things. Absolutely not. Panic immediately flooded Ethan's chest. I can't go outside like this. Clara's expression didn't change. Like what? Ethan froze. The question was simple. But the answer wasn't. Clara leaned forward slightly. If this isn't what you want, Ethan, tell me. Silence. There it was. The escape route. All he had to do was say no. One word. No. But Ethan couldn't say it. He tried. Nothing came. Seconds passed. Clara already knew. She slowly stood from the table. I thought so. Ethan remained in his chair long after she disappeared. Outside the window, the glass reflected his image. He stared at it. For the first time, he wondered something that frightened him more than anything else. Which version of himself was actually real? The question followed him upstairs. That night, he entered his bedroom with the uneasy feeling that he was carrying someone else's identity. Yet when he stood before the mirror, he couldn't stop looking. Emily. The name echoed inside his head. The curls framed his face. The clothes softened his appearance. The makeup highlighted features he'd spent years ignoring. He stared for a long time. The longer he looked, the harder it became to separate Ethan from Emily. Eventually, he climbed into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, another possibility appeared. What if someone recognized him? What if he met someone from college? What if a classmate saw him? What if strangers stared? What if they laughed? What if they somehow knew? His thoughts became a storm. When sleep finally arrived, it brought strange dreams that vanished the moment he woke. Morning came far too soon. Knock. Knock. Good morning, sweetheart. Clara's cheerful voice came from the other side of the door. We have a busy day. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. For one brief moment, he wished he could return to yesterday. Back to the safety of his room. Back to a life where everything was hidden. Then he opened his eyes. Reality was still there. He sat up. His gaze immediately landed on the outfit waiting on the chair. A pastel blouse. Slim-fitting jeans. Simple white flats. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like a costume. That was what made it terrifying. It looked normal. It looked like something an ordinary young woman might wear while going shopping on an ordinary morning. Ethan swallowed. Nothing about this was ordinary. He crossed the room. As he passed the mirror, he stopped. Some of last night's styling was still visible. The curls remained in place, framing his face. He stared at himself. The reflection seemed caught between two identities. Then came another knock. Don't take forever, Clara called. Or I'll pick something even more feminine. Ethan groaned. Fine. A few minutes later, he emerged wearing the outfit. Everything felt different. The fabric. The fit. The way the clothes changed his posture. Even the way he stood seemed unfamiliar. He looked into the mirror. The transformation wasn't dramatic. That was the strange part. It was subtle. Natural. Believable. And that made it far more frightening. Clara appeared behind him. Her smile immediately widened. There she is. Mom. What? Please don't. Clara laughed. Come here. Before Ethan could protest, she guided him toward a chair. Just a few finishing touches. Mom, Too late. A makeup brush appeared. Clara worked quickly. A little powder. A touch of lip gloss. A few adjustments to his hair. Nothing excessive. Nothing theatrical. When she finally stepped back, Ethan slowly turned toward the mirror. He stopped breathing. The person looking back at him seemed calm. Elegant. Confident. Almost natural. He looked like he belonged. And that frightened him more than anything. Because if the transformation had looked ridiculous, he could have laughed it off. But it didn't. It looked real. The drive to the mall felt endless. Ethan spent most of the journey staring through the passenger window. Every passing car seemed like a potential threat. Every pedestrian felt like someone who might recognize him. When they finally arrived, Ethan's nerves were stretched to their breaking point. The parking lot was crowded. Families. Teenagers. Couples. Groups of friends. Too many people. Too many eyes. I can't do this, Ethan whispered. Clara turned off the engine. Yes, you can. No, I can't. Clara looked at him. Ethan. What if someone recognizes me? She considered the question. Then they recognize you. That's not funny. I'm not joking. He stared at her. Clara continued. Most people are far too busy thinking about themselves to spend their day studying strangers. Ethan wasn't convinced. But eventually, he opened the car door. And stepped outside. The moment they entered the mall, his senses went into overdrive. Every sound seemed louder. Every movement seemed sharper. People passed within inches of him. Someone glanced in his direction. Ethan's heart jumped. Did they know? Another person walked past. Was that person staring? He couldn't tell. And that uncertainty was almost unbearable. Clara, meanwhile, acted as though nothing unusual was happening. She led him through several stores. Then they stopped. Ethan immediately knew what was coming. A fashionable boutique stood in front of them. Clara smiled. Ethan shook his head. No. We haven't even gone inside. I know where this is going. Do you? Clara walked in. Ethan followed reluctantly. The store was filled with colorful clothing and carefully arranged displays. Clara immediately began browsing. Then she held something up. A floral sundress. Ethan's eyes widened. No. Clara smiled. Try it. Absolutely not. Before the argument could continue, a sales associate approached. She looked at the dress. Then at Ethan. And smiled. Oh, that's adorable. Ethan froze. His entire body went still. The woman looked directly at him. I think that would look wonderful on you. Ethan waited. For the hesitation. The suspicious look. The question. It never came. The woman simply saw him as another customer. Just another person shopping. Nothing more. Something strange moved through Ethan's chest. Clara noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly with amusement. Why don't we let her try it? Great idea, the sales associate said. Ethan looked at the dress in his hands. He had no idea how it had gotten there. A few minutes later, he stood alone in a fitting room. The curtain was closed. The noise of the store seemed distant. The dress hung in front of him. He stared at it. This wasn't really about a dress anymore. It wasn't even about Clara. The question was much bigger. Who was he becoming? And then another question came. Who had he been all along? His fingers trembled as he picked up the dress. After a long hesitation, he changed. Then he faced the mirror. His breath caught. The dress fit perfectly. The colors complemented his appearance. The reflection seemed graceful. Confident. Feminine. Real. Ethan couldn't look away. For the first time, he wasn't staring at a secret hidden behind a locked bedroom door. He was looking at someone standing in the real world. Someone other people could see. Someone who, just moments ago, had been treated without hesitation as exactly who she appeared to be. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Well. Clara called from outside. Ethan looked at himself one final time. His heart was pounding. His future felt uncertain. Everything he'd believed about himself seemed to be shifting. But beneath all the fear was a realization he could no longer ignore. Perhaps the answer he had spent years avoiding wasn't a new discovery at all. Perhaps it had been waiting for him in the mirror the entire time. And maybe the most frightening part wasn't discovering who Emily was. Maybe it was finally accepting that she had always been a part of him.